So I think one of the hardest things I've had to learn about relationships is that not every friendship needs the whole story, right? So growing up, I wouldn't necessarily say I was a very relational person. I didn't really grow up seeing friendships that I wanted to emulate, right? So naturally I became very guarded person, right? Where, you could spend time with me, but you would never quite know what was going on in my life, right? I was very coded. Um, you never really know my next move. And honestly, for a long time, that just felt normal to me, right? It just felt like that was how everybody was. But as I got older, I started realizing that, um, life actually thrives on relationships. Community matters, friendship matters, just having people around you actually do matter, right? And I started to feel like I had missed out on something growing up. So, awkwardly, I started learning how to be more relational. I started learning how to be friendly. I started learning how to build friendships, right? But even then, I still found that I was still sort of guarded, right? Um, like if you visited my home, for instance, that visit ended in the living room, right? And that was it. You did have access to other parts of my house, regardless of how close I think we are, you know. And that's just how I grew up. A visitor was a visitor, right? There were unspoken boundaries. Even back then, extended families when they visited, they wouldn't dare go to my mom's kitchen and open the pot, right, and say they want to serve themselves, right. Even my mom will not even give that permission. So that mindset sort of stayed with me for a long time. But something shifted in a way that I did not expect. Um, when I traveled to have my first baby, I ended up staying with a family that I barely knew. Originally I was meant to stay with a friend, but something sort of came up in her life, impromptu, and she had to quickly arrange for me to stay with another family who was living close to her and could support me better considering my condition, right? So I suddenly found myself living with people that weren't even related to me in any way, right? And I think what surprised me the most was how open they were. There were no barriers. I had access to every room. They would tell me, you know, to go serve myself. Like, I don't think they ever dished out any meal for me. Like, they'll tell me to go serve myself from their pots. Eventually I started grocery shopping and just looking for the whole house and just storing things in the fridge and the freezer. And that was completely unfamiliar to me, because the way I grew up, that would never happen. Like, I stayed with them for like 2 months, right? That would never happen. But living with them sort of taught me that life is really not that hard, right? People can actually live with a lot more openness than we think. And I think when I went back, I carried that experience with me. Even now, if friends came over to visit, with their kids, I don't mind them, playing around the house. I just want them to feel, comfortable and at home, right? And I mean, that experience sort of just softened something in me, right? It actually did soften something in me. But then another realization started forming, especially when I had to move to Canada and I had to start building new friendships, from scratch because I had learned to be more open. Sometimes I would share, very personal things, things about my home, things about myself, things that, looking back now, probably didn't need to be shared. And I mean, it often happened when, in very normal situations, very normal conversations, you're just talking, you're just trying to seek perspective and you're wondering, is this normal? Is this how, other homes handle this? Should I be adjusting something? Right. And you start asking questions, you start giving examples. And in those moments, it can feel like you're talking to someone that you're really close to. Right. And I find that later, when I finally have a moment to replay those conversations in my head, I'll just feel off. Like I would just start pulling back a little, I'll become more, I'll become more careful. And not because anything dramatic happened, but because I feel like I'd shared something that friendship had not really earned yet. Like we don't, I mean, that friendship had not earned that trust for me to have disclosed those kind of information about myself. And once that happens, you know, things are just different, right? At least from my own perspective. And sometimes it would it would even cost me the whole friendship entirely, to be honest. And I would just, I'll slowly pull back. I will show up less. I will give excuses why I cannot come to an event because, how do you rebuild um, that is with someone who knows things about your life that you wish you had not shared, right? And you know, I noticed something else. When people know, too many private details about your life, they sometimes start, relating to you as, I mean, through those details that they know, right? They think, they think they understand your situation. They think they know you, and sometimes, I mean, that just changes things in ways that you never intended. And that's when I started learning, you know, something I wish I had learned earlier, something I wish I understood earlier, that, not every friendship needs to know the whole story, right? Not because I'm not going back to being guarded, right? It's not because I don't have friends that I trust. I do, but those ones, they've earned it. They've earned that trust. There are people in my life that I will absolutely discuss certain private details of my life with, when it's necessary, when I think it's wise for me to do that. But those kind of friendships, they were built over time, that trust was already established, right? So I sort of started realizing that, sharing the deepest part of my life should not be the way I try to create closeness with people, because sometimes I think closeness is not built through disclosing certain parts of your life. I feel like closeness is built through time. Closeness is, I mean, is not really about how much someone knows about your life. That's not closeness. Sometimes closeness is just presence, right? Closeness is those moments that you've shared together, showing up for each other. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning where the line is, honestly. But I think what I do know is that being open is good, being thoughtful about what part of your life you want to share and who you want to share that with, it also matters. Some parts are, they're just meant for a much more smaller, tiny circle. And that's something I'm still learning, right? I'm learning that, openness and wisdom and discernment can exist together, right? And honestly, I think relationships become healthier, when we sort of learn that balance. Anyways, that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.